Live images there coming from the Mangaung Correctional Center where that raid is taking place, and Ngobile Madlala is keeping a close eye on things for us. But the inspecting judge for the Department of Correctional Services, Justice Edwin Cameron, joins us now for more on the state of prisons in the country. Justice, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think one would argue that perhaps after the Thabo Bester shocking revelation that we found, especially thanks to some of the work that you've done as well. There's been a lot of interest into what actually goes on inside of our prisons. And I wonder if that spark was lit by the mess around Thabo Bester. These raids are seemingly happening more and more often, or are we just now awake to them?
Good evening, Lady, and good evening to Newzroom Afrika's viewers. It's a pleasure to be with you. You ask a very good question, Lady, because, of course, we have a new minister. You spoke about the president's verdict on the GNU. We have a new member of cabinet who's in charge of corrections, and we welcome that because he is given the portfolio specifically of corrections, which I think has given rise to some measure of heightened scrutiny and surveillance. And of course, the National Commission of Corrections, who succeeded Mr. Arthur Fraser, is a person who takes his job seriously, who gives a focus to it. But Naledi, I want to go back a step. I think any scrutiny of any correctional centre is very important. The more we bring the light of day into our correctional centres, the better. But one must wonder whether these high-profile raids actually have a beneficial long-term effect. The underlying problem, of course, is that where does the contraband get across those high walls and the razor wire and the security checks?
Yeah.
It comes in, yeah, exactly. No, lady, it comes in through the personnel. And that happens, we think, worse in the privately run G4S run prison at Mangaung. I personally have said on record that I don't think that the scandalous events that happened in Mangaung Max close to Bloemfontein in 2022 could have happened in a DCS, a departmentally run prison. But nevertheless, all prisons are vulnerable to contraband being brought in by personnel. Yeah,
and you mentioned, these privately managed prisons, and I'm curious to hear, what updates you've received around a DCS then taking over the management of the Mangaung from G4S, having run it for 25 years. Your understanding and updates that you've received around that matter?
Lydia, I don't have much to add to what you know.
Yeah.
I did ask the last minister, Minister Lamola, and he was absolutely definite that they were not going to extend or renew the contract. I haven't asked the new minister, but I'm certainly guessing, but confidently guessing, that he will feel the same. This contract has run its course. It's done our country no good. G4S has made hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of rands off the public purse in running Mangaung and running it so scandalously that the Thabo Bester fiasco occurred there. Up in Kutama Sintamule, which is near Makadu, the old Louis Trichardt, we have a different company, and I want to give that company credit to stand on its own feet. But we had that devastating fire there at the end of last year.
Yeah.
So we do not have a good record, Naledi, any good record of privately run prisons in our country.
Sure, quite a bit to talk about. I mean, I look at just the images, and I was saying, even as Ngobile, our reporter who's on the ground, was beaming those images to us of the contraband that's being found. And in fact, we're running some of those images now on the screen. I know, Justice, you wouldn't be able to see them. I'm looking at some of those rooms and then thinking about just the state of some of our correctional facilities. The Minister of Correctional Services now, Dr. Pieter Groenewald, has talked about how only 4% of our facilities are in a good state. 58%, and that's 141 facilities, are in a fair to poor state, while 15 are in absolute poor state. So I don't know if the issue here is a lack of resources that's going into these facilities, considering how important they are. You even have discussions around dealing with crime in the country. So often you're told there needs to be a synergy between the resources that are allocated to SAPS, NPA, as well as DCS. Are we missing the tail end of that?
No, lady, I think to start at the beginning, I think the DPWI, which is the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, has had a lamentable record. I don't like to knock public bureaucrats because there are many who work hard and who try to be efficient, but departmentally, the Department of Public Works and Industry has lamentably served the Department of Correctional Services, and we need to rethink how prisons are maintained, how they're repaired, who puts in maintenance on them. So I think that's one problem. And then, of course, we've got the chronic problem of overcrowding. We have space we've got 240 prisons countrywide. We have space for human bodies of 106,000, instead of which we're cramming into those spaces 155,000, which is a terrible tragedy and an injustice. So the overcrowding is the heart of the problem. Lack of maintenance is the problem. The misallocation of funds. We had a terrible run of corruption with BSASA, which my former colleague, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, exposed in his report. And we need to have consequences. We could do much better, I think, the money that is allocated, the billions of rands that are allocated to the Department of Correctional Services.
I'm going to let you go, Justice, but I need to squeeze one more in because, again, we're still beaming these visuals of this raid as it takes place at Mangaung. And one of the things you touched on in that very first part of our discussion was how do some of these goods make it over the high walls? I mean, at some point we were looking at earphones and all sorts of things that you think, well, how would they have made their way in? And you say it may very well be because of the personnel. So one could argue that this raid is a futile exercise then, because once the officials leave the raid, the personnel stays. So you haven't gotten to the root of the problem by having these raids take place.
It's a systemic and endemic problem, Naledi, not meaning to use big words, but once you lock up a large number of adult males in a confined space, you're going to get problems. You're going to get malfunctions. You're going to get corruption. Not that we sit back and accept it, but people need to communicate. We have done an audit of telecom phones across the country. Our audit differs from the departments. We say that telecom phones are not functioning in almost all the prisons. It is really, I go into a prison, I head for the telecom phone, I pick it up, I listen. There's more often than not, there's no dialing tone. So then prisoners yearn to have contact. They need those cell phones. They have the means to get them in. But let me say that what then happens, and this is an important point, Naledi, I know you need to wrap up. The important point is that they then sometimes conduct criminal syndicalist gangsterism from inside the prison. So we have to contain the problem, but we are not addressing it practically and functionally at the moment.
Sure, long way to go. Justice, an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and we do appreciate your time this evening. Justice Edwin Cameron there, Inspecting Judge for Correctional Services.